Imagine waking up tens of thousands of years ago and realizing you've started your period. You're lying on the ground beside a dying fire. There's no bathroom nearby, no pad, no tampon, no spare underwear. So what do? Do you fold a piece of animal hide, use grass, moss, some kind of cloth? How do you deal with this every month for the next 40 years? Those are probably the questions you clicked this video to answer. And we will get to them, but there's something strange about the scene we just imagined. We pictured this woman dealing with the same problem every month, just without modern products. That wasn't the case, because an ancient woman may have experienced only around 100 periods in her entire lifetime. A modern woman may experience 400 or more. That's a fourfold difference. So before we ask what ancient women used every month, we need to correct the question. For many of them, it wasn't every month. Their bodies were not different from ours, their lives were. To understand that difference, we need to go to Mali in the 1980s. An anthropologist named Beverly Strassman was studying the Dogon people. And just to be clear, the Dogon are a living, present-day tribe. They are not ancient people or some kind of preserved version of humanity's past. But in societies without modern conveniences, researchers can observe what the human reproductive system does when left to nature. Just like our ancestors. And what Strassman found rewrites everything we assume about women's bodies. In the Dogon tribe, menstruating women were required to stay in a designated menstrual hut. That custom gave Strassman an unusually direct way to observe menstruation rather than relying only on memory or self-reporting. For 736 consecutive days, she recorded who visited the hut. Then she compared those visits with urinary hormone tests to confirm that they really matched menstruation. In other words, she could count. And here's what she found. A woman in that village menstruates roughly 100 times in her entire life. A modern woman in a country like the United States, somewhere around 350 to 450. So where did the other 300 periods go? The first answer is that menstruation often began later. In the United States today, the average first period arrives at roughly 12 years old. Among the Dogon women, it arrived closer to 17. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, another living present-day tribe, it was also around 16 or 17. That difference alone removed several years of monthly cycles. Then came pregnancy. No periods for 9 months. And after the child was born, breastfeeding could keep it paused for much longer than many people today would expect. We usually think of breastfeeding as feeding the baby, which it obviously is, but it also sends a message to the mother's reproductive system. When an infant suckles, the prolactin hormone remains elevated. It tells the brain to reduce the hormonal signals that normally lead to ovulation. No ovulation, no period. This is called lactational amenorrhea. It's the body saying, there's already a baby here. Let's not start another one yet. Among the Dogon women Strassman studied, the typical stretch with no periods after a birth was around 20 months, almost 2 years. So instead of having a period every month, it might look more like this: a few cycles, pregnancy, a long period of breastfeeding, a few more cycles, another pregnancy, more breastfeeding, and then the pattern begins again. Of course, this was not every woman's life. Some women did not have children, some had fewer pregnancies, some experienced infertility or pregnancy loss. There was never one universal ancient female experience. But the broader pattern is clear. For most women, for most of history, adulthood wasn't an unbroken run of monthly periods. Researchers could even see how quickly breastfeeding affected the system in tragic circumstances. When a nursing infant died and suckling abruptly ended, a Dogon mother could resume menstruating within roughly 2 months. The body knew. The body always knew. So the monthly period that feels completely ordinary today may actually be unusual when you zoom out across the longer human story. Ancient women did have periods. They simply had far fewer of them. But 100 is not 0. Eventually, a woman still woke up, realized she was bleeding, and had to do something about it. Which brings us back to the question you probably clicked on this video to answer. What did she use? A folded piece of animal hide? Soft grass? Moss? Wool? Some kind of woven cloth? Maybe. All of those are plausible, but plausible is not the same as proven. And this is where a lot of videos and articles become much more confident than the evidence allows. They will give you a neat list. Women in one region use moss. Women somewhere else use grass. Ancient Greeks used wool. Romans used sponges. Egyptians used tampons made from softened papyrus. Listed out like that, it sounds settled, as if archaeologists had dug each one up and confirmed who used what. They haven't. The honest answer is that we mostly do not know what women physically used. They probably used whatever was soft, absorbent, washable, and available in their environment. but almost all the specific material claims are educated guesses, not documented archaeological facts. The most famous example is the ancient Egyptian papyrus tampon. You have probably heard this one before. The Egyptians had papyrus. Papyrus could be softened, so women must have rolled it up and used it as a tampon. It sounds perfectly reasonable. It is also not supported by any known ancient Egyptian text. Egyptian medical documents, like the Kahun from 1825 BCE, do describe inserting soft material, but these were connected to contraception, fertility treatments, or preventing miscarriage. They were not described as menstrual products. The softened papyrus tampon story appears to have become popular after showing up in a tampon advertisement in 1989. Then people repeated it and repeated it until eventually it sounded less like advertising and more like archaeology. Now, could an Egyptian woman have experimented with the papyrus or linen? Of course. Women are practical. People use the materials around them, but there is a big difference between saying she might have used this and saying ancient Egyptian women used this. One is a reasonable possibility. The other is a historical claim. And right now, we do not have the evidence to make that kind of claim confidently. So why is the evidence so bad? Because archaeology is much better at preserving the dramatic parts of life than the ordinary ones. Stone survives, bone survives, metal survives, but the materials most useful for managing menstruation, cloth, plant fibers, grass, moss, animal skin, usually rot. If a woman folded a scrap of hide, washed it, reused it, and eventually threw it into a fire, archaeology may never see it. Blood is not much more helpful. Even when biological traces survive, they do not come with explanations telling us whether the blood came from menstruation, childbirth, an injury, an animal, or something else entirely. Then people began writing, which sounds like it should solve the problem, except the people producing most of the surviving written record were not documenting the everyday routines of ordinary women. They wrote about kings, wars, taxes, and properties. Almost nobody stopped to write down how a woman handled days of bleeding while gathering food, minding children, and carrying water. In 2019, an archaeologist searched for published studies that tried to identify menstruation in the archaeological record. She found 4 studies. 4. In the entire world. Ever. So if you feel frustrated that such a basic part of human life is almost absent from history, that frustration is justified. It is absent. The materials disappeared, but that is only part of the excuse. Women's practical knowledge was rarely written down, and generations of historians barely bothered to look for it. One of the most ordinary experiences of half the human population was treated as though it did not deserve a place in history. And here is the maddening part. Ancient writers barely bothered to record what women actually did. Yet they wrote with astonishing confidence about what menstrual blood supposedly meant. They ignored women's lived experience, then filled the silence with theories that were not just speculative, but often wildly wrong. Take Aristotle. One of the most influential thinkers in Western history tried to explain reproduction by dividing it into 2 roles. The man, he argued, supplied the movement or activating principle. The woman supplied the material. Menstrual blood, in his model, was the female analog of semen, the same basic reproductive ingredient, but not fully cooked, because Aristotle believed women were naturally colder than men. That was his biological explanation, which is a bold theory from someone who never had a period. Then there was Pliny the Elder. Pliny wrote an enormous Roman encyclopedia called Natural History, and his sections on menstruation contain some genuinely extraordinary claims. According to Pliny, contact with menstrual blood could sour new wine, wither crops, dull a mirror just by being reflected in it, and kill a hive of bees. At that point, a menstruating woman sounds less like a human being and more like a small natural disaster. And yes, if you are wondering how anyone wrote that list with a straight face, that is a completely reasonable response. But there is a detail the popular version often leaves out. In the same body of writing, Pliny also recorded menstrual blood as medicine and protection. It could supposedly treat swellings, fevers, ulcers, dog bites, and other illnesses. Touching it to a doorway could even protect a house from magic. So Roman ideas were not simply menstrual blood is dirty. They were far more confused than that. It could destroy a field and cure an illness. It was dangerous and useful, polluting and protective. People were trying to explain a recurring bodily process, but they did not understand the biology. And when people do not understand something, they rarely leave the gap empty. They fill it with stories. But those ancient thinkers, and honestly, a lot of people today, got one big thing backwards. Menstruation is often described as if it were a badly designed feature of the human body. The uterus builds a lining, pregnancy does not happen, then the body sheds it and starts again. Why build something only to dismantle it? One evolutionary hypothesis suggests that this process may actually be the body's way to save energy. Maintaining a thick, implantation-ready uterine lining continuously would be metabolically expensive. Allowing that lining to regress, then rebuilding it when pregnancy becomes possible, may cost less. Scientists still debate exactly why menstruation evolved, so this is not the only explanation, but it gives us another way to look at the process. The body isn't malfunctioning every month, it's resetting. But understanding menstruation was never really the hard part. Talking about it was. And that silence did not end when ancient history did. When Kotex went on sale in 1920, even the buying process had to be designed around embarrassment. The boxes were plain blue with the brand name but no clear explanation of what the product was for. Some stores used coin boxes so customers could pay without discussing it. Advertisements reassured women that they could avoid an awkward conversation by asking only for a box of Kotex. Human beings had already built railways, skyscrapers, telephones, and airplanes. But buying a menstrual pad still required a system designed to make sure nobody had to say the word menstruation. So if you have ever hidden a pad on the way to the bathroom, if you have ever whispered the word period, if you have ever felt embarrassed buying products or panicked about a visible stain, you did not invent that feeling, you inherited it. The products changed, the silence proved much harder to replace. So what did ancient women do about their periods? When they bled, they probably used whatever their environment and their shared knowledge made possible. And honestly, most of that evidence is simply gone. The answer we can give with much more confidence is that many women did not menstruate every month for 40 years. The monthly period we treat as timeless may be one of the least ancient parts of modern life. And perhaps the most revealing part of this story is not what women placed between their legs. It is what history chose to preserve. We preserved the swords, the coins, the laws, the encyclopedias written by men who thought menstrual blood could turn wine into vinegar. We lost the folded cloth. Menstruation was never a strange interruption to the human story. It was a human story. We just spent thousands of years pretending not to look. And that's the part worth changing.